Okay, so welcome everyone to our webinar, Physical Literacy for Older Adults, facilitated by the Fall Prevention Community of Practice. My name is Shamiza Allard, and I am the Knowledge Coordinator at the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation, also known as ONF. ONF sponsors the Fall Prevention Community of Practice Loop and Loop Junior, along with the annual Fall Prevention Month campaign. So before we begin, I'd just like to give you a quick rundown of the Zoom meeting platform. So your screen may look a bit different depending on the type of computer you are using. So I'm just going to advance the screen. If your Zoom application is opened in full screen, you can double click or press the escape button on your keyboard to exit full screen. There should also be a button on the top right corner of your screen that says exit full screen. So on this slide, you can see that I've circled in red where the exit full screen button can be found. So right over here. The webinar technology consists of two parts, audio and visual. So for this webinar, both visuals and audio are provided through your computer monitor and speakers. So to test or adjust your audio settings, look for the audio settings or join audio button on the bottom left corner of your screen. It's right here. This will provide options for testing your computer and microphone, computer speakers and microphone. So if you look to the bottom center of your screen now, you will see buttons that would allow you to access the chat box, raise hand, and the Q&A features on Zoom. The chat box allows you to send messages to the webinar presenters and other webinar participants. You can use the raise hand button if you want to contact me through the chat box. And you can also submit questions through the Q&A box. You will only be able to view questions you have asked, not questions posed by other participants. So to simplify things a little bit, for technical questions, please use the chat box. And for topic-related questions, please use the Q&A box. And if you need to leave the webinar at any time, click the red Leave Meeting button at the bottom right of your screen, right there. So if you have questions about the technology at any time during the presentation, please type them in the chat box. My colleague Cynthia and I will be monitoring these. Alternatively, you can also email me at shamiza.allard@onf.org, and I'll work with you to resolve any of your technical questions. So the webinar is being recorded, and a YouTube link will be sent to all participants in about 1 week, along with the presentation slides. So do stay tuned if you want to share it with your network. So I would like to now introduce our presenter, Drew Mitchell. Drew is the Director of Physical Literacy for the Sport for Life Society and works as a consultant focused on the development of physical literacy and better physical activity and sport at the community level. Drew's goal is to create movement, purposeful, skills-based, and confidence-building movement in children, youth, and adults. Developing physical literacy is one of the cornerstones of being active for life and having better long-term health outcomes. Better movement skills lead to more choices, more options, more confidence, and potentially more activity. So without further ado, please take it away, Drew. You may now share your screen.
Thank you, Shamiza, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm quite excited about the opportunity to talk a little bit about physical literacy in the older adult. The opportunity has really started to take hold across the country now. Physical literacy is a term that's being more widely used and more widely understood. I'll talk more about that as we go along. So I'm going to talk a little bit about physical literacy at the beginning and then talk about some specific work that we've been doing in Ontario. And then hopefully I'll have some questions as we move along. So how do we keep adults active for life? We know now that through technology and better medicine and various other remedies, we actually have an increased lifespan, longer than we did 40 years ago. But what is the quality of that life as we move along? And how do we build better durability in our citizens as we move forward? What are the challenges to have people active more often, to provide activities that are challenging and engaging, and more important than any of those things, that are fun and people want to come back and do again? So, we use the terms like physical activity and exercise and sport which are really just all encompassed under the term of physical activity, and really are various ways for us to move our bodies and to be engaged. We know that in Canada, our population is aging. As you see from the graph, in 1971, there were a lot more young people and a lot less old people. It's a pretty straightforward equation. As we move to 2011, oops, so my apologies, that changed. That started to change quite a bit, and you can see how it's moved forward and projected into 2030. As you see, the blue is now moving towards the top. Our population is continuing to get older and older. So how do we ensure that our older adults are able to have independence, because they're mobile, they're engaged, and they're having a high quality of life? We know that as Canadians age, they do participate less in this particular case, in sport, and lots of different activities. The graph is quite steep down, as you see, from a higher level. And so it's really interesting to see that drop off. But we're seeing more in particular these days. Our society becomes more mechanized. Things start to change. Circumstances are different for different people. Isolation is a real challenge for older adults. So how do we ensure that they have a high quality of life through being mobile and being mobile in being active? We know that when we have a higher level of resilience or durability and have a setback, that setback is usually less. So you see in the graph here in the blue, when there's a lower level of physical literacy, depending on your age, the setback is quite a significant drop. When there's a setback, when you have a higher level of physical literacy, the setback is usually less. And it tends to be mediated a lot better, and you don't drop off as quickly. So it is important to build that resilience and durability as we age. So why don't Canadian adults participate? Okay. Well, we're going to give you a couple of reasons here, and again, I may not be telling you anything new. In the various areas that you work in, you may have various things that affect you. Time. The whole society's been affected by time. We're a just-in-time society these days. Lack of time, is that a reality or excuse? Conflicts and other things that I do in my life. Transportation, I can't get anywhere. I don't have my own, I don't drive. Public transit doesn't come by my home. Various things like that. Appearance. We're all a little self-conscious about our own appearance. Body image is a significant thing. Going into public places, how am I going to look in front of others? The idea of working in mixed gender groups, so men and women together. We know that our society has done we have some big challenges, especially for females in our society, where they feel overly judged. And I think that we need to do a better job around that. And then, of course, people's ability. I don't want to look foolish trying new. If this is something that I haven't done before, and so their confidence is quite low around going there. And then discomfort. I have a injury. I may have some sort of pre-existing condition, like osteoarthritis or an injury from before. I have a fear of exercise. I don't like the pain or the fatigue or how it makes me feel. I have a real fear of falling, and this certainly affects people in the winter months in most of Canada. I'm in British Columbia, so we don't quite experience winter like the rest of the country. Just so you know, I don't know if that's a secret to everybody else, but really it rarely snows here. And then financial discomfort. Fees are barriers for transportation and various things like that. So there's lots of different reasons. So really we need to think about, what does the entry point look like for an older adult who's not very confident and not very comfortable with the idea of getting out and getting engaged in activity? I'm going to leave that as a question to the group, and we'll continue to move along. For fitness needs, we know a level of flexibility. We certainly want to have a level of balance and strength, and of course, some aerobic endurance. These are very basic requirements that are there that help us move through life physically and have a better quality of life when these four fitness areas are of a reasonable level. So we know, it is about confidence, and it is about people feeling okay to be out with others. From an appearance standpoint, do the rest of the people, that audience that's around me, it can work against me in learning and having fun. Are there safe places for me to give things a try, or am I gonna fail in front of others? So how do we create those safe places for people, especially new learners or new people to whatever the activity is? Um, how do I try different things? I have a level of discomfort. I don't know what I can do easily or not. We know that confidence is built on a fun and challenging experience, and we need to help older adults overcome appearance and discomfort. So how do we help them do that? So what is physical literacy? I'm going to ask Shamiza to now put up a poll just very quickly for everybody to do here now. So in this particular poll, have you heard of the term physical literacy before? I'm not going to make that assumption. And so it'd be interesting if everybody could just vote the yes or no. That would be great. And we'll get a bit of an idea of what the crowd's around this. And then in the question answer section, we can maybe drill down into this a little bit more. Like I say, physical literacy is a term that's been around North America. Oh, okay. Yeah. So about 75% of you have heard the term before, and 25 not. That's great. That's an interesting perspective as we move forward, and hopefully we'll learn more about that. So let's talk a little bit about what physical literacy is. Physical literacy is really about building physical competence. So that building that ability, that skill. When we were young, I'm a little bit older. I just turned 60 6 weeks ago. I feel, or actually 2 months ago, I feel now I've taken a new step in life. I guess I'm an older adult now. I try not to act that way and move that way, but it is my reality. Physical competence is about having ability and skill to do things. So can you catch, can you throw, can you hop, can you skip, can you move confidently through your environment? And with that level of skill that you acquire through various activities that are purposeful in skill building, you develop a higher level of confidence to move because you've acquired these skills. It's like anything. I now have this ability. And it starts to affect your ability to think about your own level of doing things. And with this heightened level of confidence, I'm more motivated to come out and try new things, and especially if they're fun and engaging and socially connecting. So those are really important components. We'll talk more about the social connection piece as we move along here. It is also important to have knowledge of why it's important to move and to value it over time. So the idea is to build over time this cycle so that we're building more skills, we're building more confidence, we have more motivation that is built on the first two premises, and we get more engaged around active participation. We know, like literacy and numeracy, they're learned things. You have to learn the alphabet, you have to learn your numbers, your ABCs, your 1, 2, 3s. It's no different with physical literacy and movement skills. You have to learn how to throw. You have to learn how to catch. How to move yourself in the water. All those different things. They are learned skills. Now, we know that there are some people that learn them quicker than others. And in that particular case, they have to do fewer tries or fewer practice components to be able to do those things. But it's important that they have the opportunity to do that. When I was younger, with my friends, I would tear around a lot more. We would build our skills organically in the community, climbing trees. Adults weren't telling us what to do. We were making up our own games. We were more engaged around what was going on in our environment. We were making lots of decisions. It's different today. And so we do have some older adults who came through that and built those skills. And now, they live in the fruits of that because they have moved ahead in and manage themselves through their adult years. They've kept active in a reasonable way because they had acquired a level of competency and a level of confidence when they were younger. Others may also have been movers when they were young, stop moving into their adult years, and are trying to get re-engaged in their older years now that they have more time. And then there are people who may not have been moving as much when they were kids and did not move through their adult years and really don't know where to get started at all in their older years. And so there's a whole different plethora of people. So we would never teach people half the alphabet or some of the numbers. We do that all the time with movement skills. And so we need to change that. We need to change our process as to the way people are provided opportunities to intentionally learn how to move and how to move better. With the physical literacy approach, it means a number of things as it affects the body. You're activating the brain to learn new movements and skills, and we see this from brain scans very clearly that that's an important component. As you move along, you develop a broader range of movement competencies, just like literacy. As you learn to read and write more, you develop a greater movement vocabulary or reading vocabulary or literacy vocabulary. And in this case with movement, it's no different. When you're supporting learning with fun, social, and challenging activities, that only lends to greater learning, greater competencies, more confidence building opportunities, and more motivation to come back and be engaged in that again. So you see with groups, older adults are no different than kids in many ways. They want to cluster with others. They want to be with others, and they will come out and do things. So whether you might see at a senior center, people clustering together to come together and be connected. That's one of the things about whether it's a card game or whether it's lawn bowling or whether it's other types of activity, walking soccer, which is now something that's starting to pervade into communities more these days, is older adults playing walking soccer, building confidence and desire to participate, taking advantage of the body and brain plasticity. One of the things we know from stroke research is the brain is very plastic. You can teach an old dog new tricks. You can do this. And when we move and we learn, it is protective to our brain and to our body. So it is important that we do get people moving more often. So physical activity, physical fitness, physical literacy. What is the difference between these things? Well, first of all, like literacy, to become more literate, you have to read and write. Well, to become more physically literate, you have to do physical activity. So we need to have physical activity as part of what we do. Now, there are physical activities that are better set up, better run, better managed, and more engaging and more inclusive and more challenging. Those types of activities are the type of activities we want to make available to people. We know that exercise, as an example, can sometimes be mundane. And it's one of the main reasons why people don't want to return to doing it on a consistent basis. There's no fun connected to it. So there's constantly a search for those sort of things. Now, we know when we do physical activity on a regular basis, we become more physically fit. That is an outcome of being physically active, is we increase our fitness level depending on what type of activities we're doing. And remember, we talked about those 4 fitness areas. Now, how does physical literacy is different? When we do physical activity on a regular basis, that is quality physical activity, and we become more fit, we start to actually gain a higher level of physical literacy. And when we have physical fitness and physical literacy together, we're more durable. And how do we develop more durable? So by improving skills and confidence and motivation, it becomes a foundation for more activity. And it begets more. So more fitness results in better health overall. Seems like a simple formula. The problem is we have a hard time getting people started. We also have a hard time keeping people doing it. And does this lend to the fact of what type of activity are we doing that's not engaging people enough for them to maintain? it is a lifelong journey. It's not like all of a sudden you wake up one day, hey, I'm physically literate. Awesome. That's not the way it works. It is over the life course. And we know that as we age and our bodies grow and change, we need to adapt and learn new movement skills. There may be some things we can't quite do the same way. We may have to modify those a little bit. We continually build on existing physical literacy with new activities and experiences. It's like anything. We want to build, we want to scaffold on to different things we've done before. It's an important way to look at it. We transition to different activities as things change in our lives and circumstances become different. So it's important that we have these opportunities to transition. And that's what's really important in modifying activity for people, changing it up so they have a different stimulus. And then, as we move through life, through recreation, matters, and community programs, which is where most of the stuff in a community is delivered, we have different experiences. We may meet new people. We may build new friendships and new activity partners as we move along. So this is the pathway we need to develop. And we shouldn't be waiting until adults are older to do this. We should be doing it over our lifespan so that when we become an older adult, and at whatever age you want to define that at, it is important that you do have some homework done, that you have a body of work in behind you. And so it is that's the greatest opportunity is to learn those things and then to practice them through your life. But we also know there's opportunities for people to hop on at any point. Practical for adults, lots of different activities out there. It is important that those activities are done in a way that still keep you safe, but also challenge you in ways that continues to build you going forward or maintain your status. That's another word that's used in the physical activity and exercise world. This particular picture depicts poling. Poling has become very popular for older adults, and it is interesting. I actually have a longtime colleague, Dr. Jack Taunton, here out in British Columbia. Jack was an amazingly active person, probably overly active in his life. He's become a little bit more frail as he's aged, and he's had some injuries. But he uses poles now to get around everywhere. He's an amazing physical specimen because the poles have really changed. And I've actually seen people use poles versus a cane as another way of moving around and able to maintain their balance. So it is interesting how things modify and change over time for different people. The evidence in the area of physical literacy is growing. The term is not new. It's been in the nomenclature for over 100 in North America, created in the United States by engineers. And it's interesting, the term usually raised its head when technology evolved. So when the car was first created, physical literacy, the term seemed to surface around that time because the feeling was society would be changed by this new invention, this new innovation. It surfaced again around the time that the transducer and computers were starting to surface because the thought was it was going to change how humans interacted and how humans would move. So it's been very interesting. Dr. John Kearney, Dr. Dean Dudley, and Dr. Dean Kriars have been leaders in the world around the development of physical literacy. This is a recent paper of theirs that was published in the Journal of Sports Medicine. It's important around building an evidence-informed model around physical literacy. The model is, as I depicted, this is a little bit more structured than the cartwheel I showed you earlier. So it is about confidence, motivation, social participation, positive effect, fun, happiness, enjoyment. How do we gain that in what we're doing? Movement competence, variety of environments, not just in the land, but in the water, in the air, on the snow and ice. For older adults, snow and ice is a very scary space. But interestingly enough, the sport of curling actually teaches people how to be safe on ice and participate on ice. We know that lots of people who do get on the ice in the winter may fall, and in some cases with older adults, if they're a little bit more frail, they may fracture a hip, and outcomes can sometimes be challenging when people go into the hospital and they're older with a broken hip. So how do we actually model better movement on these surfaces for people? Or do we just have people continuing to avoid them and be locked in their house for the winter? So we need to look at strategies that actually help people build confidence on ice. Now, the falls prevention people are probably freaking out right now. Oh my God, what are you thinking? What I'm saying is that we need to, it's like swimming in many ways. It's important to learn how to swim and have the skills on how to swim. It's also important from a physical literacy approach to have the knowledge and understanding to make better decisions around water. And that is what ultimately prevents drowning. You can have the best swimmer in the world who's made a bad decision around water, who can drown. They have all the skills in the world to survive in the water, but they've made a bad decision. So it's important, and the knowledge and understanding part of the definition of physical literacy, that we are making good decisions as we move forward. So what I'm saying is modeling and creating an opportunity for people to move on surfaces that in a protected way will help people overcome their lack of ability to move on those surfaces. So it's a balancing act as we move along, and I'm sure we'll have some questions around that in the question and answer. With this model, we know with more social participation, we increase in transport and various other components. There's an environment and individual factors that happen. There's positive psychological components that happen from this activity, okay? And then from there are individual factors and environmental context there. So with physical health, we know with activity that we have a greater positive effect on things like type 2 diabetes and overweightedness and blood pressure and so on. We know in mental health, we reduce the risk of depression, anxiety, increase self-esteem. And with social health, we increase productivity and social inclusion. Physical activity does this. Physical literacy, if we develop a higher level of physical literacy, so not just the physical skills, but also the confidence and the motivation, those affective domain components, if we have those in combination, we have a greater chance of having the types of outcomes we want to have, greater adherence and greater consistency of people being active on a more regular basis. And we know in the literature, very clearly stated literature, around the positive health effects of moving on a regular basis. And they're all depicted here. So this is the new model from early childhood to old age that is now being proposed through the literature. It's in its early days, but it's starting to trend around how we approach physical activity moving forward. So we want to shift the paradigm, okay? As we work with older adults, older adults are a different population. Adult learning is a different component that we need to be aware of when we're providing instruction or facilitation for people. So the physical activity needs to be appropriate for the population you're working with. We want to enhance cognitive function with this activity. We know activity promotes psychological well-being. We know activity promotes social connection. It will help us embrace life transitions, manage chronic conditions, and practice along with practicing mindful nutrition. We hopefully will have a better durability level to move forward. So I want to talk just briefly about a project that we did funded by the Ontario Sport and Recreation Community Fund from the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport in Ontario, with 3 different communities in Sunnybrook Hospital from 2017 to 2019. The purpose of the project was to focus on adults 55 and older. That was our defining level. The idea here was we wanted to educate older adults, and more specifically, people who work with older adults about developing physical literacy. We wanted to train people who are working specifically with older adults, caregivers, exercise specialists, partners, various people like that. We worked on developing an assessment tool for assessing physical literacy for older adults, and it really did we learned a lot in the Activate Aurora project. You see on the upper the push-up guy up there. The Activate Aurora project created some really interesting components as we move forward, and in our build component, we wanted to have a community-based pathways that would better connect health professionals with older adults. There's programs out there like Exercise is Medicine, Participate to Get Active, various programs where we interface local community care, usually physician-led, nurse practitioner-led, or other types of practitioners, and helping older adults or adults to actually give them prescription to be more active. And it's so building these types of programs can have some really positive outcomes as you move forward. So that was the premise around our program, was to engage in 4 different components. The project itself, we learned a lot from the project, but really just scratched the surface. Being down in the Niagara region, where we were with St. Catharines, was very interesting. Lots of older adults in Ontario down in that region. Some very active groups down there who are doing some good work at helping older adults get mobilized. One of the things that was created in this project was a workshop around training people who work with older adults. And so now I want to talk a little bit about what we did there. So this is a very real life situation as to what we did around developing physical literacy for older adults. The learning outcomes of the workshop were: what is physical literacy, differences between literacy, activity, fitness, some of the barriers that are out there for older adults, how to use the 5+5 program characteristics, which I'll talk more about in a moment, and how to create modifications to help people get active. So this workshop is very practical, and it's about helping that caregiver, that exercise specialist, that recreation specialist, that programmer, whoever is working with the older adult, to a greater level of knowledge and provide a better experience for the older adult in the activity session that they're doing. The 5+5 to produce the quality session is built around both session characteristics and design characteristics. So in the session characteristics, the session has to be fun and social. It needs to include everyone. You always have to be moving. It needs to be progressive and challenging, and it needs to be done with purpose. So those are the 5 key characteristics of the session, any type of activity session you're having. The design considerations: you need to have appropriate space and equipment that are for the population you're working with. We use a teaching games for understanding approach in a number of things that we do. We want to make sure we're focused on both right and left symmetry. So both limbs, both hands, both legs, both hands. We use mimicry as a teaching component, and using cueing and feedback as another component around the design of the workshop, of the activity. So let's talk about the 5 characteristics for a quality session first. It needs to be fun and social. Game fun. In this particular case, they don't need to be competitive, and they're built more around challenging the skills of the individual. It is important to be engaged with friends, and so the idea of bringing a friend is as a key component. You start to build in social activities, and you leave time for talk. So this is in the design of your activity. Not unlike a lesson plan in a school setting or a lesson plan in a recreation program setting. Same thing. What are the components of your activity, and what does it look like? And is it allowing for these different components to be tapped into? Everyone's included. Everybody needs to be active, so there's no waiting. You need to have a number of stations. So that's the benefit of having stations up. You set the starting station, and you have a variety of activities. and they can move from station to station. That's one way to do it. You need to provide a challenge to each person's level, not just a single level of for some people it's easy, some people it's hard. That's the greatest challenge of an instructor, a coach, a teacher, is to be able to create an activity that actually is customized in its own way to the challenge level for each of the participants. So that's where your instructors or whoever you're working with are gold. That's where we need to be able to get people in training our instructors, teachers, leaders. Accessible programs look like this. From an attitude standpoint, everyone's welcome every time. They need to be open to learn feedback, and you need to make changes to improve and include more people. From a communication standpoint, we use inclusive language. We have a diversity in photos and promotions, and we are using accessible fonts with high contrast. And if we're working, so that we can attract everybody, so people who are visually impaired can gain access in this communication link. The architecture it has symbols and signage. There's automatic doors or no doors at all. There are appropriate washrooms and counter heights for people who may be in wheelchairs or other devices, scooters. There also are ramps and accessible equipment. And then the programs and services, they have adapted equipment and programs to support each individual's ability, which is important. Welcome peers and support personnel. So anybody who's come with the older adult is welcome to participate in what's going on. And then it's led by trained leaders and coaches as we move forward. Progressive and challenging. You don't want people to be bored, and you also don't want them failing all over the place. How do you find the sweet spot, right? So as you see in the graph here, you have task difficulty on the vertical axis, you have participant skill level on the horizontal axis. If you go up above the challenge zone, you have anxiety and frustration because you can't do it. And if you go down below the challenge zone, you're bored because it's too easy for you. So you've got to find that challenge zone. So assessing skill and discomfort level is important at the beginning, and monitoring it over time with your participants. It's important to present suitable challenges in an appropriate way. So that lends to language and how it's introduced. You need to progress the challenge. You need to add variety, and you need to provide a safe environment for people to fail. Okay. Failing is part of learning, and that's so important. We've used the term snowflake is very prevalent in our society today, especially for, labeled onto our millennials. I actually own 2 millennials as kids. One's a little bit younger than that. But it's quite interesting, this whole fear of having people fail. We need to get over that. We need to provide an environment where people can have a successions of failures and successes, and it's challenging so that they feel stimulated by what they're doing. We need to add progressions. So skills become natural through repetition, practice. And so really what sport and physical activity become more than anything is movement homework. That's what they are. And doing more repetitions lays down, especially through good instruction, quality instruction, and practice that's done intentionally. Repetitions lead to greater skill levels. We need to be sequencing things together, okay? So we sequencing progression to be able to take the next step into what they're doing. There needs to be a comprehension and decision-making model so that they have their own ability to problem solve if they get stuck in a movement situation. So that needs to be a communication component that's involved with the instructor and the participant. And then because we're doing brain training here as well as part of the activity, depending on if you're laying in a new activity or you're reinforcing an existing activity, you need to allow a little time for adaptation. And it's important that that's there, because that's how we scaffold and move things forward as we move along. With purpose, we challenge them to be intentional. So teaching games for understanding is about questioning and asking questions. We'll talk more about that in a moment. The idea of having skill challenges as puzzles, okay, is an important thing. Each part has a purpose. There's a warm-up, there's skill learning, and there's fun and activity embedded in whatever you're doing. So it's important that this is the way things are constructed, the way the activities are constructed. Then we have the 5 program design considerations, okay? So appropriate space and equipment for who you're working with. Specialized equipment is not required. Scrunch paper or beanbag instead of a ball for juggling activities. Cereal boxes or hula hoops as targets. Painter's tape or chalk to mark the ground, okay? Select a space or equipment to help participants give them an opportunity to do lots of repetitions and obtain their own knowledge of results. If they know what they're doing, they can build on their learning over time. So if there's a level of repetition, they get to do it over and over. There's almost a self-correcting that can go on as they move along through their repetitions. There's some cueing that can be given by the instructor to help with that learning. But in many cases, when you remove the barrier for people to have the opportunity to move in a skill building way, their level of repetition, their brain starts to help them correct as they're moving along. With instruction, that only enhances that as we move forward. Teaching games for understanding. So this is an interesting component. It's done in physical education, but very easily used in other settings as well. The idea is to use components of bigger sports. So using non-traditional games to stimulate learning. You start simple and then you build the complexity of the activity as your participants start to progress and get better at what they're doing. There is a carryover to other types of activities. It is learner-centered. It's all the participants are involved in what's going on, and they're critical to the success of the activity. We need to get participants thinking. So there is some decision-making components and questioning to consolidate your learning. So this is how we start to create these environments that are more engaging. There's discussion, there's dialogue as they're doing the activities, or they get moments to debrief on what's going on. So you can see here right now, we have a non-traditional mini game, skill-based. There's the game appreciation. It's fun and full of participation. There's tactical awareness. We're learning the basic strategies and we want to try different tactics. How would you do this? How would you do this differently? Right? And get people to come up with their own components. This is where you get people starting to strategize and make decisions. And it's really an interesting way to approach it. With decision making, these are real time to say, what should I do now? How should I do it? Okay. So again, the instructor, the teacher, the leader can be there to help. But the idea is that they're in small groups, they can do this decision making together. Then we have the skill execution. Okay. A skill selection for the appropriate skill at the appropriate time. What is the best way to do this? And then the performance. Play a game applying new knowledge and skills. So the whole idea is you're building through steps and pieces, okay, with teaching games for understanding, where we teach a piece of a game or an activity that reinforces the whole performance of playing a game more fully. And I strongly recommend, this is probably an area for most of you you've never seen before, or maybe just heard of before. But teaching games for understanding is a great way. It's a great application for your activity design to have people more engaged around the activity they're doing. So not just blindly doing it, but way more involved in what's going on. Mimicry. If you've had anything to do with kids, this is one of the main ways that kids learn themselves, is they watch others move and they mimic that. Older people can do exactly the same thing. There's no reason. But it is important that we do have people try and mimic people who are better movers and not learning bad habits. So it is important to provide this opportunity for people to have other examples to learn from. A lot of people are visual learners. And so when they see another person move, they can immediately copy that movement. And that's what mimicking is. So it's a really interesting component on learning, especially in group activities. Right and left symmetry. So many people do not have good use of both hands, mainly because they have a dominant hand, as an example, and they've used that dominant hand their whole life. And so when you are doing activities, if you are leading activities or participating, is that if it's a throwing and catching activity that or involves throwing and catching, then it's important to say, okay, use your other hand now. Or if you use a kicking game, use your other foot now, because it's important. If people are not instructed or guided to do that, in most cases, they will not do that on their own because they're comfortable in using their dominant hand. And so let's just say an older person has a disability or acquires a disability with one of their limbs, and it's their dominant hand. They've got to relearn what's going on with their other limb. So there is method to the madness of having that ability with both hands in particular, to move through life, just as a practical life skill. So it's really important to have that left-right symmetry. Cueing and feedback is an important way to teach. You need to provide proper cues. It may be a key word or something to reinforce a specific movement they're doing. And in that particular situation, you're providing that cueing. You're not giving them a giant description of what you want them to do, because when many people are learning, their brain is totally focused on getting their body to learn what they're doing. They can't listen to all that. So it's important that you just give them a small cue thing that allows them to focus on what they're doing. You minimize the feedback. It needs to be, again, concise, easy to understand. As I said here, if you're trying to give this great description to somebody while the skill is being practiced, they're not going to pay in most cases. And as an example, the knowledge of results means if my task is to throw a beanbag and hit a target, well, I'm going to know when I'm doing it when I'm successful, because I'm going to hit the target. So it's important that we do activities that provides knowledge of results to people, because they can see their own level of improvement while they're doing it. So we've come to the end. So we're about 12 minutes before 1 o'clock Eastern time. Questions. I'm hoping that I've allowed you to think about this in a little different way. Fall prevention to me, and as I age and as my parents age, and my practical experience in my life has been that how do we actually build a greater level of durability and competency in people? So that's actually the thing that prevents them from falling. So I put it out to you as one method around that, and developing physical literacy in older adults will lead to an increased quality of life for them. So I'm going to go to the Q&A section. Shamiza, is there anything else you want me to touch on, or is there any specific question that you want me to address to start off in this section?
Sure. So just first of all, thank you very much, Drew, for your presentation. It was really wonderful. And I think we all learned a lot. So we do have a few people. I just see a couple in the Q&A who submitted their questions. So we can address them now. You can kind of read through and kind of address them.
Sure.
So participants,
Sure.
if you have any more questions, feel free to throw them into the Q&A box, and Drew will answer them, read them out loud and answer them live. So take it away, Drew.
Sounds good. I'm going to go to the top. So Lynn Watkins, what type of setbacks are we talking about? Physical health only, or does this apply to mental health circumstances? I think we have to remember that that physical and mental are tightly intertwined. Physical well-being, mental well-being are highly intertwined as to what's going on. And there's no doubt that, we see circumstances with older people who go down a road where their mental status is super sound. They're good, but their body's falling apart. And I think it's really challenging for them. And likewise, we have people who, unfortunately creep into or others, or other less debilitating conditions. And it is important for them to still be active in their own way. So I think when we're talking about various setbacks, they could be injuries, they could be any number of things. But how do we ensure that for the quality of life of somebody, they are able to move, to have a little bit of independence? Because I would say that independence is probably one of the greatest factors for quality of life as a person ages, for their own self-confidence and for their own well-being. I'm just going to slide back up. Sorry, I'm just trying to get, we have a hard time getting participants to some exercise classes, I think, because it's hard to get them motivated to try something new. Any suggestions for educating older adults on importance of it? I think if we try at the individual level to try and get people to participate, that's hard. But if we try and get them to come as a small group or bring a buddy or have a friend, this is where the social connectedness piece is, this affective domain piece, this confidence and motivation piece is really important around activity. Is how can we create an activity that actually helps people work with others, and in cases where people are brand new, maybe don't bring them into a large group to start with, bring them into maybe just with one other person, and start to help them build their confidence around moving in front of others. There's a number of different strategies around that, and I think it's important that we try and do that. Is the workshop on physical literacy available to share with other agencies, orgs in Niagara? I'm a health promoter. Well, there you go, health promoter. Would love to connect my contacts with those who run the workshop. So the workshop it was funded up until June of this year, and it's no longer has any funding in place. So the workshop is available at a cost. And it can be delivered. One of the things that was done was we have a number of people who are trained in the Niagara region who can actually deliver the workshop now. So you can contact Susan Gerbala. So that's Susan@sportforlife.ca. Susan@sportforlife.ca. She is in Niagara on the Lake, and she can probably help you if you wanted to set up a workshop because she's on the ground in your region. I'm a senior safety coordinator. What are some ways?
Sorry, Drew. I'm going to type that. I'm actually going to type that out. So it's SUZANE.
Yeah. No, Susan, SUSAN.
Okay,
Susan
got it.
at sportforlife.ca. Yeah. And she'll just be so excited to get emails from everybody. I'm giving her email address out.
So I'm going to, everybody, I'll put that in the chat so you'll have Susan's contact. Sorry to cut you off. Continue.
That's okay. No. I'm a senior safety coordinator. What are some ways that physical literacy might improve safety for seniors? Well, I think if you can get people to develop a higher level of physical literacy and have a higher level of competency and confidence in moving, it's going to improve their own level of safety with themselves. So their balance will be better, their strength will be better, their awareness will be better, and hopefully their decision-making capability will be better as well. So I think that's the way we have to look at it from that angle, is how do we improve the individual's competencies to be self-sustaining and able to navigate their environment better. Do I have specific games or activities as examples? I think any activity that's going to get people out there moving around, there is lots of good activities that are delivered in many of the recreation settings and senior centers around Ontario. There's some really good work out there, it'd be hard for me to sort of list off games and activities right now, but I think there's more and more of this stuff that's starting to surface as we go along. How to improve PL in a single setting when somebody has memory issues to remember. And we deal with this exactly in cardiac rehab and chronic disease management programs where you're dealing with people with multiple conditions. Absolutely. As an instructor, leader, teacher in those settings, it's important that you're patient, and you may have to rotate around and ensure that the instructions are given more often, especially for those people that do have short-term memory challenges. And maybe, there can be a buddy system in that as well. The more you connect other people to assist each other, the more connected they become, and the more they will do things together. So it's one of the challenges we see in cardiac rehab and chronic disease management programs right now. People don't want to leave. They get into the program and they probably, for health outcome, can leave now, but they don't want to leave because they're socially connected to the group. And it leads to a bottleneck in these programs. And so this is what's really important about when we look at existing programs. Cardiac rehab is a hugely successful program driven by hospitals into communities. And it is the group dynamic that is one of the key reasons that people come and do it all the time. And that, again, that's foundational to, we believe, to exercise and activity adherence is that social connectedness. During a program, how can I balance challenging the older adults physically while ensuring it is safe and environment? Yeah, it is. That's why the ratio for older adult classes tends to be lower, the ratio of instructor to number of participants, because you do have situations where it's unlike with kids. There's maybe kids who are not as skilled with other kids who are more skilled. In the case of older adults, I mean, you have to be aware that they could fall, they could hurt themselves. So you need to be very aware of this as you're moving along. And ensuring that that there is a reasonable amount of supervision as you're moving along and as they're developing in doing the activities. And again, that buddy up situation may be a way of helping you manage the group on your own as you move along. Do you have suggestions how to build realistic confidence to improve PL and OA with fall issues? Yeah, that's a much more specific question. I would leave that to the specialist like Dr. Dean Criars, who works in this particular area. I'm a kinesiologist by training, but I don't work in the OA area. So actually, there's a number of great OA programs in Ontario that I know. I'd recommend you go in there. What do you recommend as a max class size for a fitness physical activity? Oh, I would say, depending on the level of ability, if the ability is lower, then I'd make the class size no bigger than probably 5 or 6. If the class has reasonable movement competency, then you can increase the size up, and that's the way I would gauge it. And we've actually, one of the things that was created out of this whole program was an abilities course, and it's basically an obstacle course, physical obstacle course for adults. Older adults, and they move around and you get an idea of how they're moving. They get an idea of how they're moving, because self-awareness is really important here for people participating. They need to know themselves how well they can move, because that level of confidence helps them become a better learner as they're moving along. So it is important that we help people do this. Do you have any resources or websites where we can get activities for older stroke clients? I'll have to get that to you. I don't off the top of my head, especially for stroke victims. Yes, I don't have anything right at my fingertips right now. Does the evidence involve the older adult sector, or is research done primarily with children? There is lots of different populations being assessed. Physical literacy in older adults is a bit of a newer area. There's no doubt about that. And as we continue to move along through this, there's going to be more and more research done here. The research does tell us, though, that we need to get people moving more often, more consistently, and in different ways. And that's critical. And Christine, you've been asking a heck of a lot of questions here. Holy smokes. Or Kristen, is there a link to the ability parkour score you just mentioned? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. The abilities course. Sorry, the abilities course. Yes. Yes, there is a, what's happening right now is we're actually using the abilities course to inform a questionnaire around being able to help adults assess their level of activity ability. And that's happening in partnership with Sunnybrook Hospital right now and the University of Manitoba. So that continues to move on as we move along. And is there a measure to help seniors evaluate? That's what this abilities course is. It's in its early days. It was being mostly used up in Aurora and in the Niagara area, but we're starting to use it now in South Surrey, White Rock, and British Columbia. So this is all new. It's not really out there hanging on a public website yet, but it's starting to move in this direction. And my goal here today was more so to let you know this stuff. And now we need to get more of this into the ether so that people can start to address it.
Okay. Thank you for doing that. So I'm actually gonna just wrap.
Are we off? Offline now? Are we offline?
No, we're still going.
Sorry.
Oh,
okay.
Thank you to all of our participants today for joining us and engaging us in this really great discussion. Thank you for all your questions. So I know we're hitting the 1 o'clock mark, so I'm just going to quickly wrap up. So for more information about the fall prevention community of practice, please visit loop at fallsloop.com. And so again, as a reminder, November is Fall Prevention Month, and we all have a role to play. So visit our website for ideas on how to take action and promote fall prevention in your community. So that's going to be at www.fallpreventionmonth.ca. And so when the webinar has ended, you will be redirected to Zoom and invited to participate in a short survey. So just click the blue continue button on your browser and you'll be redirected to the evaluation survey. We'd appreciate if you could please provide feedback so we can continue to offer high quality webinars such as this one in the future. And I think that's it for me. Thank you guys. Thank you all again for participating, and we hope that you have a wonderful day. See you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.